Francisco d'Ancona.
Watching, we know you.
Assalamu alaikum, welcome to another edition of Face to Face with me, Azad Ali. This week we're going to be discussing the tragic and horrific death of 50 Muslims in two mosques in Christchurch in New Zealand. The event has shocked the world. And in the studio to discuss this is Talat Sultan, who's a community outreach worker. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Jazakallah khair for joining us, Talat. This tragedy, over 50 Muslims killed whilst they were in the masjid for Salatul Jummah, what do you think?
Shocking, subhanallah, it's shocking, and as it settles in, there's in the community there's fear, there's concern, it's a level of hysteria, parents and children alike feeling that could this happen in our masjid, in our area locally. So there's lots of concern, there's lots of questions being asked right now.
Subhanallah. I mean, just reading through the stories, and I don't know if any of our viewers did get to see the video, and I hope you haven't, for your peace of mind and your soul is horrific. When you see, I made the mistake of watching it when you saw that. And to see, people just being shot like that is just something that is going to be difficult to erase from our minds. But I think amongst all of that, there were also some stories of how, for example, when the killer came in first, how he was greeted and everything else.
Yeah, I did find that a bit of a strange anomaly, because you wouldn't normally greet somebody with holding a machine gun in their hand, an automatic weapon, coming into the masjid. So I can only make an excuse that the uncle who was at the door at the time, a humble man, mashallah,
maybe he was trying to pacify
security. Maybe he thought it was he was part of the security force, the local police or something. Because he was dressed in all the kind of combat kind of garments and that.
And then there's another story of how a Muslim sister, she kind of put herself in front of the bullets to save her husband and everything else. Yes.
I mean, stories are coming out now of heroism. Also, there was two young men, one at the masjid in Masjid al-Nur in Christchurch, where most of the killings took place. And he had put himself in the way and tried to tackle the terrorist, and was killed in the process. And what we didn't hear early on much about was the smaller masjid, where 7 people, so he'd gone off from Masjid al-Nur to this other smaller community mosque, and that's where 7 people were killed. And some say, news reports are now coming out, is because one of the musallin, one of the attendees at the mosque, actually confronted and tackled the terrorist and chased him out into his car, and even picked up one of his weapons, which he dropped, probably run out of bullets, and gone and got another one with ammunition in it.
The courage and bravery.
He did, and he grabbed whatever he could in his hand. He took a PDQ machine, cash payment card machine, and threw it at him. At that point he'd run out and gone back into his car, maybe to reload ammunition into his weapon, and he was shouting at him, and that may have startled him, and he thought, right, this is too much, and he's gone off or whatever. As time goes by now, we'll be receiving more information about that.
What do you kind of make of the general reaction from the ground? You're out and about quite a lot.
Yes.
How do you think, first of all, how have the Muslims responded to this?
I think it's been beyond. You'd think there will be a lot more panic, and maybe you might think that there might be some reprisals as such. We're hearing about this attack in Holland on the tram, but we don't know it's
too early to say what's going on.
It's too early to say, But it's been actually quite, what can I say? a strange time where people are actually coming together, they're consoling each other. There's been vigils. We saw the one at Finsbury Park Mosque, hundreds turned up there. And not just the Muslim community, the wider community coming. I mean, the bouquets of flowers, like in one of my local mosques, and letters of support, and messages of support coming in. It's actually been amazing. If anything, it's brought about this kind of wider unity in the community for now. And then, you know, where Muslims in general were feeling isolated once again, that fear settles in, and to have the non-Muslim brethren and community members to actually come and give them a word of support, a hug, it means a lot.
Okay, and how do you think the community's kind of taken to the response that was given by, say, the Home Secretary or the Prime Minister and people like Jeremy Corbyn and others?
Yeah, I think at this time it's accepted, any positive words. However, you know, as things settle down, people will start asking questions as to what led to such an attack. We've seen since the past 2 decades, particularly post 9/11, a rise in far-right extremism. And that unparalleled with a rise in Islamophobia. And questions will be asked with regards to maybe freedom of speech. And is it being exploited? And the far right using that?
I mean, this area I want to kind of explore a little bit more. But if I just bring you back to the, I mean, so we've seen, like, you know, usually when these things happen, they're like you mentioned, it is a strange time. People don't know how to react. There's a lot of numbness, to be honest. You know, you just don't know what to do because this is such a traumatic experience. The trauma is huge, even though we're like 12,000 miles away from where it actually happened. But I'd like to kind of just hear from you, like, you know, how have, like, for example, our sisters and how have children and younger people, how have they reacted to this? Yeah, so
they say that visible targets and soft targets would easily be our sisters who wear hijab and go out and take children to school. And there's been a lot of apprehension and fear, you know, children going to madrasa. I was listening to the radio earlier on, mother called in and said, look, my children go to madrasa, my children are asking what if such an attack happens at a masjid. Parents have been put in that position where they're having to discuss this horrific event to a certain level with their children, and children being persistent because it's gone wild on social media, as you know, the video has been shared widely and everybody's talking about it, it's on headline news. As expected, but you know, how do they speak to youngsters, you know, as young as 6, 7, about this? And
I mean, I'm sure there's many parents who are wondering, okay, what do they say to their children? I mean, what would you kind of advise?
I think generally masjids and Muslim institutes have stepped up security. I think rightly so, not overreacting, but being a lot more vigilant. You know, we do know the scenario of with the advent of social media now, you get the copycat attacks sometimes. If there's any other people there who are harbouring certain hatred and views against Muslims, could they come out and think, you know what, I'm going to have a dig as well and have a go? We saw the Finsbury Mosque attack take place. So vigilance around masjids, you know, don't be on your phone when you're walking in, pay attention, look at your surroundings.
People kind of like looking at how to make themselves feel safe and everything else. And do you think, because this is kind of been for the last 20 odd years, it's been a time where there's been huge kind of focus on the Muslim community, and you know, almost to the point where, you know, Muslims have been created into a suspect community. Islamophobia is like, you know, is mainstream as politicians and others have said. Do you feel like, you know, in that environment, do you feel people in the UK, I'm asking specifically, in your community I'm asking specifically, do you feel that the government, the authorities, the politicians, the council or MPs, they're actually showing enough to reassure them?
I think they are responding. My local MP, I come from East London, so I'm in the borough where there's a fairly large population of Muslims, and you know, our MP directly responded. She's very active on social media as well. And however, there's so much more that can be done. You know, there's so much more that can be looked at. I mean, I can give examples of, it wasn't too long ago, about a year and a half ago, when I actually witnessed a horrific, violent man outside our mosque saying that he's going to blow the mosque up, and he had like a dagger-like thing in his hand, and everybody just stood there, you know, and I called the police, and the first thing was that how comes anybody else hasn't reported this to the police? You know, people have that fear that if I'm reporting it to the police, maybe the perpetrator of the crime, you know, the aggressor might come after them. Going back many years, I remember when we were growing up in the 80s and 90s, my father used to say to me that one day our life might become difficult over here to live, and you think back and you know, reminisce and think, is that happening now? I mean,
so there's people who are thinking this. I mean, this is people who were born here.
Yeah, I mean, born here. I mean, my father came here in 1965, and he was a young man. So then there was a lot of violence and racism, you know, that they faced in, you know, small isolated communities living here. And growing up in the 80s, 70s and 80s, definitely I've experienced racism firsthand. I mean, one of our local boroughs like West Ham, I used to live behind West Ham Station for 6 months. We had NF carved on our door. Every day we went out to school, we had to hide, feared for our life, often coming home with black eyes, getting bullied, beaten up.
People are feeling that kind of anxiety.
Yeah, not to that extent, but you can feel that. Yeah, you got to watch your back when you're out. When I'm traveling through the city to work on the other side of London, you're going on the underground, and you know, now and then, post 9/11, you had this situation where you might get on a carriage on a train, and somebody sees you overtly Muslim, beard and that, and the odd person you might see come out of your carriage and then go into the next carriage. Well, they were both empty and they were seated, and I've experienced that. I'm wondering, what was that about?
Yeah. So it does sound like, you know, people are taking this quite personally in that sense, and it's actually quite sharp in their feelings that, you know, am I safe if I go out, and it's actually very hard to hear something like that, that, you know, in your own country that you're being made to feel like that. But let me just stop you for a second, because we are actually coming up to a break. So viewers, do stay tuned. Inshallah, we'll be back after this short break. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back after a short break. So just before the break, Talat, you were talking about how the sense of anxiety, the sense of fear is quite palpable in the community.
Yeah, I mean, it's a time of confusion. Where will this go? You know, particularly for our sisters and young ones, you know, because they can be easy targets, you know, in areas where there are large Muslim populations.
I mean, one of the killings of the stories that's come out of the murder of that young child in Christchurch.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, horrific and callous. Can you believe it? We were told a toddler who was running across the road, a 3-4-year-old, away from the masjid in Christchurch Masjid, the north, and he chased the toddler and shot him dead, or him or her dead.
I mean, when you hear something like that, and then you see, you know, some commentators and others, they kind of try to almost like, so we've seen headlines in newspapers saying, you know, this guy is angelic and he was bullied, and you know, this humanizing of the person that's taking place. How does that make you feel?
Well, it's sickening, to be honest with you, and there seems to be a double standard in the mainstream press and media to some extent, because one would question that had the killer been of a different ethnicity, from a minority community, how would the media have actually reported on this in their headlines? You know,
and this is one of the things that comes up time and time again, isn't it? That, you know, there is this a particular way where people of color or Muslims are projected in the media, and then white people. And we never seem to kind of get anywhere with it, because what happens is, like, you know, quite rightly at the moment, there's a lot of people, and to be fair to a lot of non-Muslims as well, that are really, really angry and are clearly pointing the finger at, you know, how media kind of demonizes and everything else. But then it dissipates, then it disappears.
It will. Well, we'll see in this case if that happens. And but what we need to do as equal citizens in Western countries, you know, born here, first generation, and now we have 2-3 generations settled in Western countries, demand our rights as citizens equally, and make sure that we lobby our MPs and councillors to ensure that there's adequate security. Neighbourhood watch, as we have in the UK, is around Jummah, around masjids.
Yeah.
And simply, like when I've called the police, they just said, we just don't have to cover your masjid. We just don't have the resources to have a neighbourhood watch going around on Friday prayers.
Yeah, and do you think there is a way to hold people who do constantly kind of push that Islamophobia narrative? Do you know how can these people be held to account? And who do you think are, you know, yes, Brenton Tarrant, he pulled the trigger, killed 49, 50 people, yes. But before he actually shot the first bullet, he actually wrote a 75-page manifesto. He actually planned this. I mean, the mayor of Christchurch and the head of police, they all said that this was a very well planned kind of terrorist attack, you know, murderous attack.
That's right. I mean, if you look in that manifesto, he made his intentions very, very clear, and you can clearly see some of the issues that influenced him. Like immigration, he clearly mentions immigration. Yeah. There are influences from the far right in the UK, and this has all been investigated at the moment. We'll see what the outcome will be, whether justice.
What would you like to see? I mean, what would you like to see happen to people who do kind of demonize and kind of, so like, you know, you have politicians who kind of say, you know, if you're wearing a niqab, you look like a letterbox, and and the Muslim community is a fifth column or something like that.
I think Islamophobia needs to be taken seriously, and callous and distasteful remarks, racist remarks such as that, whether it's about hijab or whether it's about a prophet, whether it's about Muslims in general, need to be brought into check, particularly when it comes from people who are leaders in positions of influence. And then what would you expect from the lay masses? And then that supports the agenda of far-right movements. And we've seen that militancy grow. I mean, was it Joe Cox who was murdered in the streets of London? By a far-right activist.
Yeah, it wasn't in London, outside London.
Yeah, outside London.
Okay, so this, I mean, we've kind of heard so many people commentating on this, but do you think, like, you know, that there needs to be legislation brought in? I mean, what is it that's needed to actually stop? There clearly, I mean, there's a big distinction to be made, which is that if people want to criticize Islam, call it backwards, call it whatever, you know, everything else, there's no issues with that. But it's about when you create narratives that then facilitates what this, you know, murderer did. That surely has to be something that needs to be looked at.
Definitely, it does have to be, and I think that Islamophobia needs to be recognised in the mainstream. We know that local policing does recognise it as a hate crime separately. So when it is recorded now, it is recorded as a separate hate crime. And the other issue is some people draw the parallel between anti-Semitism, which is recognised in law. You know, and why can't there be a recognition for Muslims? You know, and sometimes people may downplay that. Oh, it's a phobia, cannot be defined. It's not really racism. I mean, clearly,
well, there's a APPG that actually put forward a definition and is asking for that recognition. And I mean, whilst I think that's really important that, you know, at street level when these things happen, that needs to happen. I'm still not sure that, you know, this the institutional side and the structural side of things is going to get looked at. How would you like to see that?
It needs to be looked at. I think Muslims in communities need to go and speak to their MPs, lobby that, raise it in the Houses of Parliament, and get government to actually take action on that. And take it really, really seriously. And if it means legislation coming in place, then be it so. Because we've seen since post 9/11, on par with other extremist crimes or claimed extremist crimes, Muslims been handed like really big sentences for terrorism, for instance, or even perceived terrorism, for example. I think the far right for far too long have gone unchecked.
Okay. I mean, obviously, when the tragic incident took place, it was early morning here, Friday morning here, and as by the time most people realised what was going on, it was like 9, 10 o'clock in the morning, and people were preparing to go to Jummah. And I don't know what you felt, but I felt that actually, the mosques were, there were more Muslims coming to the mosque. It didn't put them off from going to Jummah. Is that something you experienced?
I did myself. I just happened to have woken up 4 a.m. that morning before my Fajr alarm and checked my phone and see BBC News pop up 3 a.m. in the morning. This report of a massacre, an attack in New Zealand at a mosque for Friday prayers. So I wasn't quite sure about the time zone at the time, and realised that there were people actually at Jummah when this attack took place at these two mosques. The people, a lot of people would have come to the masjids looking to be consoled by their imams, looking for a sense of direction as well, to see what the imams are going to say, that our community leaders are going to say in response to this. And of course, people feel a solace and security in numbers, naturally. And the Jummah khutbahs, of course, across London and UK wide would have addressed this issue to some extent on the last Friday.
Yeah, I mean, we're coming to an end soon. One of the things you mentioned earlier is about safety and security. I mean, what can masajid do to make their premises more secure?
There's two sides to that. One is that children do go to masjids, to madrasas, so safeguarding issues and security should be looked at. Entrances and exits. Is it easy for any stranger or anybody to actually access and compromise the security of the masjid unchecked? Most, if not many, of the masjids now have advanced CCTV systems. Post 9/11, this was expected, and there's always workers or security at hand. A few masjids, the larger masjids, may employ licensed security guards. So there's a visible deterrent there at the entrance of the masjid or at reception. But most will probably have admin staff who are working at the masjid, keeping an eye on things.
I mean, so some people are saying maybe we should get more guards and things like that. I mean, it's not something that's really feasible. A lot of masajids, they're small. They depend on the donations and everything else.
That's correct. Yeah.
And is it? I mean, I don't want to say it like that, but is it? Are we panicking? Maybe
there is a sense of panic, and there will be a sense of panic and reaction. I suppose for the following weeks after this attack, there should be a level of heightened security at masjids if there are any wannabe copycat attackers.
But a lot of people said to me, look, we pay taxes, right?
Yes.
The police's job to keep our premises safe.
Well, they should. I'm a firm believer in community policing in terms of neighbourhood watch, etc. And they should be. I know one of my local masjids, they do rounds every Fridays. But that masjid is located strategically near the town centre. Other masjids in probably more rural areas or quieter areas, the suburbs, may not be afforded that same level of security and police support.
Okay, and I mean we've come to an end. I mean, what was your parting message for our viewers?
Well, remain confident, don't panic, don't let fear set in, and we will rise above this and move on, inshallah.
Inshallah. Okay, Jazakallah khair. I think that's a good point to end on. And I think, look, one of the things we have to remember, the 50 brothers and sisters, and some very young, who have died, who were killed, murdered. There's some things we need to understand. Number one, they believed in Allah. They were Muslims. Number two, they were purified, they had wudu, and they were in the masjid. Number three. And number four, they were waiting for the salah, prayed, and many of them died in salah. These are perhaps the best positions to be. We were going to die one day, but these are the best positions to be when your life is taken. And may Allah accept them as martyrs. And inshallah, that is the case. And I think, look, as Talat said, we shouldn't let panic and fear take over. So on that note, stay strong, stay confident, and stay Muslim. Take care. Assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah khair.
You're watching. We know you.